All right, on the story for us is CTV's Jeremie Charron. He's joining me now. So let's talk, if we can, about BC because, that's where there's this massive fire near Fort Nelson. Now there's a second fire as well. Thousands of people have been forced out. They're in places like, as you know, Fort St. John, as well as Pink Mountain, even as far south as Dawson Creek and other parts. What are we seeing? What are we hearing?
Yeah, really, the big story today in BC and, in Alberta as well is watching the weather, hoping that this cooler weather with some light rain sustains throughout the day. That will be the biggest help for the people of BC and this fire that is being fought in Parker Lake and affecting Fort Nelson. More than 4,600 people, about 4,700 people have been evacuated. The main fire there that is still out of control is 127 square kilometers. And you talked about the fact there is now a second fire nearby as well that crews are having to fight off too. And the fires are still, technically out of control, but have been kind of maintained, if you will. The fire is not growing substantially, and that's thanks in part to the light rain and the cooler temperatures that are allowing firefighters to stay on top of things. The struggle here, Todd, is that these fires are so impacted, so heavily impacted by the weather, and it can change so fast. A little bit of rain, cooler temperatures make a big difference in a good way. But then that rain stops and the temperature rises a little bit, the winds pick up in the right direction, and suddenly, conditions are significantly worse. So crews are closely monitoring everything there. The message is still for those who have been evacuated to stay that way. There's no talk yet about bringing people back. In fact, the warning is to be prepared for people who have yet to be evacuated, to be prepared to do so if need be, if things change.
Tell me as well, that's the situation when it comes to the weather, but, for people who have been forced out, and we're talking now, it could be about 15,000 people. That number continues to go up depending, the issue of accommodations. We know that a lot of hotels have stepped up and motels, and people in the community, people are getting food vouchers, they're getting reimbursed for some of that as well. But, it starts to stretch into a week, 2 weeks, gets pretty tricky and challenging.
Absolutely, Todd. The longer this goes on, the harder. And, the larger the number of evacuees, the harder. You talked about BC, Fort St. John, Dawson Creek, Prince George, some of the communities that have stepped up and started welcoming evacuees. And as you mentioned, the hotels will start to let people in, and the municipalities work with hotels and community centers to try and get people, the necessities, what they need, and find places for people to stay. But the longer this goes on, the harder it is. There's no doubt about that. Same thing is happening in Alberta. A lot of evacuees from Alberta, over 6,600 people in the area of Fort McMurray have been evacuated. A lot of those people in Edmonton. And so responders are trying to find accommodations. As far as we've heard so far, there's been no major issues in terms of people not being able to find places to stay. Of course, some people are going to stay with loved ones, families, friends that they have. But for people who don't have family or friends nearby, they're relying on these small municipalities or relying on officials to help find them places to stay. And so it certainly becomes more difficult the longer this goes on. Everybody, as I say, both in Alberta and BC, watching that weather very, very closely, because that will be the biggest difference maker over the next 24 hours or so. If the weather stays the way it is, it allows firefighters to do a lot more damage or good, really, in fighting the fire, rather than just having to fight the blaze that continues to expand. And so that's just kind of the situation everyone's in. It's difficult, finding places to stay while hoping that this weather that's helping right now holds.
CTV Jeremie Charron in Ottawa. Thank you, Jeremie, for that.